Passive CEVNS detection. I'd like to present my work done in collaboration with Bernadette Coxwell and Apurva Goel. So why should we talk about CEVNS? Neutrinos do provide unique ways to monitor reactors, and current elastic neutrino nucleus scattering has a large cross-section relative to other neutrino cross-sections, that is. And so it would allow potentially for small or smaller detectors. At the same time, CEVNS has not yet been seen at reactors because the nuclear recoil energy is very low. It's only a few hundred electron volts at best. And the proposed detector technologies are mostly cryogenic. A lot of them involve phonon detection, so they're really in the millikelvin range. And as a result, you have stringent shielding requirements against ionizing radiation and neutrons because you're looking for these low energy signals. And so the suspicion is that the system footprint likely would be as large as for traditional inverse beta decay, which detector which can live with a lot less shielding and certainly does not require cryogenics. So our concept tries to change this a little bit. So the idea is that nuclear recoils damage the crystal lattice permanently, either by forming tracks or vacancies. So this is shown here on the right-hand side. This is based on a trim simulation. And so the scale here is nanometers. So in blue, you see the CEVNS tracks, and the dots are the vacancies these CEVNS events make. And in comparison, you also see in red how cosmic ray neutrons would look like. So they tend to be much larger events because they're also more energetic. Since these things are recorded permanently in the crystal and these records are stable at room temperature, you can have an offset readout building an entirely passive detection system. And since this is based on nuclear recoil already, you have an intrinsic rejection of ionizing backgrounds. You're not converting recoil to either scintillation or ionization signals, which also can be mimicked by other types of radiation, but you're really looking at the recoils themselves. And so this leaves now only neutrons as your backgrounds. This idea has been explored for dark matter detection in this series of papers, but not for reactor neutrinos. And this is what I would like to talk about today. So you have two types of damages, as we've already mentioned. You have tracks and vacancies. The tracks result from the distortion of the lattice in response to ionization, whereas vacancies are point defects in the lattice where you remove an atom from a site. Both are persistent at room temperature in many materials. And again, here you see the result of a simulation of a 100-gram sodium crystal, sodium iodide crystal at a sort of commercial reactor. And you see in solid in both pictures how the event rate goes down either as a function of the number of vacancies you observe or the track length you have. And you also can see that the neutron backgrounds are sort of order of magnitude larger, even in the most favorable regions. So that's something one has to contend with. But you see in both cases that there's a fast drop-off. What is interesting is that the drop-off was in the vacancy case is much more moderate with higher number of vacancies than it is with track length. So now I'd like to discuss vacancy formation in a little bit more detail. So vacancy formation is here, you have this picture here. So this is, at Sirius sits the atom that you want to displace. And depending on which direction the displacement goes, you need different amounts of energies to do this because the lattice and its binding energies are anisotropic. What is important to recognize is there's the equilibrium defect formation energy. This is essentially close to the binding energy of a crystal. However, to really create the displacement, you need to remove the atom far enough from its original site that it cannot recombine. And this distance is a few nanometers, and therefore you need to have enough energy to move these extra few nanometers through the crystal, and so you get this large difference. This results in threshold energies in the range of 20 to 100 electron volts typically. And this roughly scales as the melting point. This is heuristically found. There's not a strong theory for that, but that's what one finds practically. This topic is well studied since that's the main mechanism for radiation damage in, for instance, reactor vessels. And we use this trim package in full cascade mode to simulate these things. And here you see sort of how this looks like. This is your damage energy. This are the vacancies formed in copper in this case. And here you see solid a certain theory model prediction. This is complex physics. This trim package is sort of a standard, but certainly not 100% accurate. But we hope that qualitatively it captures the features we need, and also quantitatively is not vastly off. Then I'd like this color center. So if you form vacancies in ionic crystals, in particular, if you remove the anion, then this can trap electrons. So this is illustrated here to the right. So the green ones are the anions. You take one out, you have an effective net surplus of positive charge, which now traps an electron. And this electron is basically now quantum mechanics in a square well, or in a more solid state language, you basically now have energy levels in the middle of the band gap, and now it can have optical transitions to the conduction band. This is also used to change the color in gemstones. So this is a calcite, unirradiated and irradiated. And what's important here for us, that individual color centers can be seen in visible light by fluorescence spectroscopy. And this has been demonstrated and attracts great interest in quantum information science, nitrogen vacancies in diamond, for instance, or vacancies in silicon carbide. I should point out this is observed in a wide class of materials. Essentially anything which has ionic bonds can have these color centers. How would you read them out? So for quantum information and nitrogen vacancies, confocal microscopy is used, where you essentially send in green your excitation light, and in red you get the fluorescence light out, and you do a really 3D scan, and your focal point maybe is 1/3 of a micron in each direction. You really have to scan through the whole sample to get all defects. So you get a precise location, but you only can do this in tiny volume, because scanning a volume really just takes a long time. So Budnik et al. Have proposed, in the context of dark matter searches, to use an optical fiber, essentially the same concept. You send in your excitation light, you filter out the fluorescent light. So this would give you a volume imaging capability, but you do not get a location of the effect axially along the fiber. And so if there are already pre-existing defects, you couldn't pick them out from the other ones. And so you're operating against the background of pre-existing effects. And so this is actually not very suitable for passive readout, really. What we like to think about as a viable readout scheme is so-called light sheet microscopy. So you start from confocal microscopy, but instead of having anything coming through the same optics, you illuminate your sample from the side with a sheet-like light construct, which you just get by standard optics. And so you now can image your whole field of view, and this is really developed by biology which would like to image things like a whole zebrafish, for instance, at micron and submicron resolution. You can, sorry for that, you can then also play tricks to get the third axis extended and allow you rapid scans in this direction, which is, for instance, the SPET light sheet microscopy technology. This gives you sampling rates of the order of 50 to a few hundred cubic centimeters per day. So you really can take big microscopic chunks and image them in micron and submicron resolution. And this will give you 3D precision and a large volume. And these light sheet microscopes are commercially available. So we think this is a good readout scheme. Now we can return to the question of nuclear recoil threshold. Really, this is for dark matter detector, for CEVNS detection. That's the figure of merit. And it's important to realize that the nuclear recoil threshold is generally higher than ionization scintillation thresholds due to quenching. Here we don't deal with quenching because we directly make the nuclear recoils, and it is a key performance parameter for any sort of detector in this arena. And we achieve sub-electron volts for both tracks and vacancies, as you can see in this right-hand plot here. So you see that for 1 nanometer tracks, I get a very low threshold, and you see, however, for 2 nanometer tracks, my threshold goes basically already to 100 EV or so, and you see the single vacancy threshold is maybe 70 or so, and the 2 vacancy threshold is also about 100, but the threshold function rises much steeper than the 2 nanometer track length sample does. And you can see that for really very low thresholds, and this is what we need in a reactor context, vacancies seem to be a much more robust scheme. And I'd like to point out that the nuclear recoil threshold of less than 100 electron volts so far has been only achieved otherwise by cryogenic polymeters. CEVNS detection is a very active field. It has not been observed at reactors yet. So this is sort of a world map where you can see who all is trying. And if you look at the right-hand plot, this shows you the accuracy which you can measure the CEVNS cross-section as a function of the background rate you have. And you see that even a 10-gram crystal would bring you to the sort of 5% as a range. And this is at a commercial reactor for 1 year data taking, so you can scale how this goes for other types of reactors. And you can see that already with a sort of 100 grams, you get really to a few percent levels. 1,000 grams, you could probe well beyond what your systematics would allow you. You only have to contend with the neutron background. As we said, this passive shielding configuration is about a 1 meter equivalent water shield, so it's like a meter of polyethylene or so. You do not require active shielding. That does not buy you much, as you can see. And active shielding passive readout doesn't work because you can't read to a passive detector. And so we really would probably want to use a passive detector which has no cryogenics and then a really small footprint. I mean, you're really talking about something, the A peak. How does this now apply to safeguards? So essentially you would verify a shutdown of a reactor. And we'd like to look at the 90-day one significant quantity criterion. So what's shown here is as a function again of the background rate, the 90% upper limit in kilograms on plutonium production. The horizontal black line is of course 8 kilograms. And so here's a number of materials which essentially are chosen for having a large A target because the cross-section scales like the atomic mass squared. And so clearly things which have a lot of bismuth or tungsten in them are very nice. But also these things have different threshold energies and so on and so forth. And you can see that with a passive shield, several of these materials fall below the one significant quantity limit. And so that's encouraging. What I also would like to point out that all these materials are commercially available as radioclean optically quality crystals, and the shield is very small. It is very moderate. You need to get there. How is this mission relevant? As I said, you would verify the shutdown of a reactor. You can verify, so thus the end of plutonium production. And if you look at smaller research type reactors, you could get a limit on the reactor power and duration of operation. And so this directly supports the non-proliferation portfolio of the NNSA. What's the expected impact? We think that one thing which is worth to point out is this is non-spoofable. The neutrino signal is unique. You have a distinction to neutrons because neutrons and neutrinos scale differently with the AF detector materials. So by combining materials in one detector, you get this distinction. And the pre-existing point defects fingerprint the given detector. This is where really this capability to pinpoint these defects with our readout scheme is crucial. And you're looking at passive detectors of order 100 grams. So this is the size of a Hershey's bar, which likely can be incorporated in safeguards operations without disruptions because it's not so fundamentally different from tags and seals as the IAEA is already using them. The detector materials are commercially available. So this here is some BGO crystals you could buy. And also light sheet microscopes are commercially available. So this is one thing you found. Also, I'd like to point out this is not big. This is really tabletop. And that in the context of machine detectors, these devices are fairly cheap. It's all visible light type stuff and optics, which is all material technology. What's the MTV impact and the next steps? We of course would like to finish the paper in the next few weeks, and then we'd like to embark on an experimental program where we verify the action of a single color center and relevant materials using light sheet microscopy. We'd like to study the backgrounds, both in terms of crystal effects and natural cosmic chaining neutrons. And then we'd like to go the next step, take some small samples, have them irradiated with neutrons to really test the underlying signal formation mechanism and see whether our computational tools are up to snuff. And then, of course, we'd like to deploy the reactor and find CEVNS. And so this here is a call for collaborators, anybody with expertise in lasers or microscopes. We're really looking for collaborators to actually build and deploy a prototype. What's the conclusion? First of all, I'd like to thank my collaborators, Dr. Bernadette Coxwell and Purva Girl. Passive CEVNS detection based on color centers seems theoretically feasible based on detailed simulations. Resulting detector sizes and deployment footprints appear promising. It wouldn't require cryogenics. The detectors are small and light, and they're passive. And of course, you also have possible applications to dark matter and neutron detection, which we also would like to study. Thank you very much.